As many of you have heard, the WEF, the World Economic Forum, has recently concluded their annual meeting in Davos, where many world leaders and think tank leaders and so-called philosophers and intellectuals gather to plot on how they can best control you, your economy, your money, your life, and how they can subvert the natural order of things with their sort of artificially, socially constructed tools. That is basically the primary reason why Davos goes on. Now, I was particularly disturbed this year, as I am every year when I look at what's happening at Davos, because in 2022, what we saw in Davos, we saw a conversation on how we can make the metaverse and virtual reality, which is going to become the new social platform of the next 20, 30, or 40 years, more equitable. So basically, they want to infuse political ideas into the place where a lot of humanity will be congregating, so they can basically create this sort of Overton window that keeps those platforms in their measure. And there were other things that were said last year that concerned me as well. But this year, I was particularly concerned because a group of conservative, or Republican, I'd probably say, Congress people from America decided to go ahead and go join the elites in Davos in their scheming. And some other conservative political officials decided to do that. Brian Kemp of Georgia, my old home state, was actually one of the people who decided to go over to Davos to hobnob with the would-be central planners. Now, there have already been many arguments and defenses from people like Eric Erickson and the Washington Times that have said that it's a net positive if conservatives go to global platforms of discussion like WEF and they fight for American values. I'm going to explain to you why the kind of thinking is actually erroneous in a second. But when I first heard that was going to happen, I thought to myself, well, Christian, is there any positive to this? Is there any positive to an American politician going and hobnobbing with these people? And that brings me to the title of today's video. There is no compromise with globalism. Some of you may believe that title is an alarmist title. Others of you may believe that title is simply a talking point title used by the right to stir up emotion and passion. I'm not someone who is in the business of making you angry. I'm not someone who is in the business of trying to make you a passionate man as opposed to a rational man. All human beings are bestowed with the power of reason, and I expect you, within the sound of my voice, to use it in your everyday life. If you are a concurrent viewer of mine and you do not use reason, you have to really evaluate your actions. Globalism, my friends, is not the boogeyman that a lot of people make it out to be. But it is a dangerous force that cannot be compromised with if nations are going to exist in the future. When I say the word globalism, many of you probably have this idea of these multinational corporations who buy up land, who use that land for political purposes or for their own selfish purposes, and then in the process of doing that, they manage to have a stronger grip over the global economy, and they do this in coordination with other big groups. That's not what globalism means. Globalism, my friends, is not merely an action. It's not merely an organization. Globalism is a moral and social outlook. Globalism is a value statement. Globalism says that the nation state itself is insignificant when measured against the world. Globalism basically says that nations and their own independent sovereign existence are not sufficient when it comes to a broader and more holistic world. They view the world through a sort of cosmopolitan lens, a sort of what we would call a universalist lens, by which they measure how certain nation-state specific actions should be taken. For example, a globalist might say America has the obligation to intercede in Ukraine for the safety and stability of the global world economic order, the liberal international order. A globalist may say that. A nationalist, in the strictest sense of the word, may say, well, the nation and its identity and its own priorities come first as opposed to the world. Now, these are two very big ideas that have a very rich history in political philosophy that go all the way back, spanning decades, and are oftentimes not given their due in political conversation. But these ideas are not what is important, my friends. What's important is what they represent. And what's important, as always, is connecting broad, abstract ideas that you may not understand, that I may not even understand, to concrete reality. All men have common sense. Every single person within the sound of my voice has the ability to channel their inner humanity and bring forth common sense if you want to. The problem these days with political conversation and with our attempt to understand certain concepts is that common sense is oftentimes discarded for comfortable platitudes that take us away from reality and put us in the hands of manipulators and rhetoricians that do not have your best interest at heart. When in doubt, always default to common sense. Common sense tells us that nations cannot exist on a global scale. That is an oxymoron. Nations are inherently localized. A nation that is considered to be an international nation is a contradiction in terms. If we said that Belgium was an international nation, then what landmass, what area, what territory does Belgium have? It doesn't have any, because an international nation is a global nation, and that's an idea that makes no sense. It's literally like saying 2 + 2 is 5. It's a logical contradiction. Nations, by their very existence, are inherently localized. They are inherently restricted to a certain geographic area with boundaries, with cultures, with mores, with different societies within them that define what they are. And in the case of America, I'll go even further than that. The nation also has a guiding axiom, a guiding principle, which supersedes the landmass, the societies, the culture, and imposes upon them a certain kind of moral order. America is not merely a collection of a bunch of people that came together one day and said, hey, let's make America. America is fundamentally an ideal translated into material form, put on the earth in the form of a nation. The WEF, the globalists, don't want this concept to exist in its proper form. They want the nation to no longer be localized. They want it to be internationalized. Because when you internationalize a nation, sovereignty, localism, landmass, borders, all that stuff goes away, and it makes it easier for external parties to inflict their vision of the world upon those nations. This is why, in some of the sessions I'm going to read you, the WEF talks about these very broad ideas. The future of jobs. How to fight disinformation. These aren't politicians or people in particular countries discussing policy in the country. These are technocrats, journalists, politicians, intellectuals, business leaders, going to one area, trying to intervene on all of the world's problems in broad swoops, because they disregard the inherent local nature of a nation. Is it clicking? When you understand what a nation really is, and you understand what globalism really is, you can best define it in this context. Now, my friends, when nations become less and less defined, and society becomes less and less defined, it becomes so much easier for society to be treated as a collective organism that can be controlled by a select few of people. Again, this is one of the reasons why the WEF talks like they do and they act like they do, because this is fundamentally how they view society. The Fourth Industrial Revolution, which comes straight from Klaus Schwab's terminology, views the world as a sort of this single moving current that can be measured on one stream, as opposed to a bunch of different streams and currents moving in different directions. America is not on the same level that Saudi Arabia is. We are much higher than Saudi Arabia. But the globalist, the WEF person, believes that all the world is somehow interconnected through sort of mystical bonds. But that's not how reality works. And that's why these ideas are so dangerous, because globalism is anti-reality, because it rejects the precepts required for nationhood. And so we can tie this view of society, this view of the nation, back to the particular policies that the WEF actually mentions and actually wants to implement across the world. Oh, so for example, I'm going to play you some clips here. Here's Joe Manchin talking about why he believes the open press has caused problems. Go.
The problem that we have is the open press system and basically all the platforms. So if you're able to have 5 platforms, social platforms, that you can basically personify the extremes, somebody who is extremely right or extremely left, and it seems like that is the majority speaking. They're not the majority, but they're basically driving everybody to make a decision. What side are you on? Are you on this side or this side?
Here is the CEO of Moderna, who pushed the Moderna, one of the biggest vaccines out there, talking about how he had a much easier time in countries that prohibited discussion, open discussion of certain things about the vaccine than he did in America. Go.
In some countries, you saw scientific debate in national TV at prime time. So you can imagine how people were scared. Ben has said, a lot of political debate in some countries, and the US was kind of maybe one of the worst places in the world. And you saw the differences of countries where all the parties would say, this has been approved by the regulators, clinical studies have been done, you should get your vaccines and so on. And then, as Seth said, the social media was just terrible. And so at the time of uncertainty where people were scared for their loved ones, many people, locked downs, it was very hard for everybody from a just mental health standpoint. When you couple this with all that environment, you could see some countries where you had scientific debate and political debate and social media. If you had those 3 things, the vaccine rate very, very low.
Here is the Secretary General of the UN, one of the most powerful organizations in the world that has been behind so many conflicts and so many economic catastrophes and initiatives in the world, basically saying he thinks social media companies should restrict speech. Go.
A good point. When we grew up and read the papers, the editor took the pride in everything being correct in the paper. And now there's no editing. It's up to the individual to then assess if this is true or not.
Yes, but there is a responsibility of the platforms. One can argue if we have something, as you mentioned, in the media, and if someone is attacked in a way that is wrong, there is a possibility to go to the court. In social media, there is no responsibility. And I can understand the argument of social media platforms saying, well, this is put by people, so it's not our responsibility. But the truth is that the algorithms are made in such a way that they amplify in a preferential way a certain number of things. And when the algorithm amplifies, then there is, in my opinion, a responsibility, and there should be accountability, including through the legal system in relation to those situations.
Here's Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of the UK, one of the worst in my opinion, saying that he wants to have a database, a digital database of people who have been vaccinated and not vaccinated, so that can be used for policy decisions. Go.
I think there's a huge impetus now for a national digital infrastructure. Digitization in healthcare is, I think, one of the great game changers. We should be helping countries to develop a national digital infrastructure, which they will need with these new vaccines. And then, finally, it's also about showing people and showing the political leadership that you can make a positive difference to your healthcare system by adopting these measures, because they've got an impact beyond any particular disease or pandemic.
There are just so many examples of anti-human concepts falling from the mouths of people that go to these conferences and sit on these panels and cross their legs and act so posh and prim whilst they plot the absolute destruction of free societies, of any society really, because all societies are built off of voluntary transaction. You don't have a society if you don't have people voluntarily transacting and cooperating with each other. You don't have a society, you have a serfdom. You've got a bunch of serfs. And there are plenty of people that actually believe that we are a bunch of serfs these days. I'm not as pessimistic, but these folks would like to make us a bunch of serfs. That's most certainly true. So, the problem I have is that conservatives, or even American politicians, forget conservatives. Joe Manchin, a Democrat, who is more conservative but still on the leftist side, went there as well. You cannot be an American. I'm going to say this. You cannot be an American and support the ideas that are posited by so many of the people that go to Davos and plot and prim for the destruction of free societies. You cannot. Americanism is not merely a census designation given to you by the customs office. It is not simply a certificate given to you by the government. Americanism is fundamentally an idea that presupposes certain moral principles that are dominant, that are universal, and that are unchanging. One of those principles is man's ability to reason and the necessity of liberty to ensure that man's ability to reason is not hampered by tyrants. Another one of those principles is the inherent virtue that rests in observing the world for how it is and not trying to change the world to fit your own aims. There are just so many universal principles that the American experiment presupposes that Davos rejects from the outset. You cannot be someone who calls yourself an American, much less someone who calls themselves a member of the American Congress, supposed to serve the people, supposed to ensure that the principles of America are implemented into law, although they haven't been there for a long time, but still, you cannot be someone in those capacities and go to Davos. You cannot be an American and participate in anti-American activities. Davos is a manifestation of hubris, of the tyranny of central planning, and of fundamental anti-American principles. That's what Davos is. So for Joe Manchin, for Brian Kemp, for Darrell Issa of California, for any of these people to go there and compromise with globalism is for them to, in essence, spit on the principles of America that actually sustain and establish the offices they occupy. The free speech argument being made for conservatives to go to Davos falls short. It's like saying that I'm going to go and talk to a bunch of drug dealers about virtue and hope that sticks with them. But if those drug dealers have been dealing drugs for decades and they are settled in that lifestyle, they're settled in that mindset, nothing you can say can divorce them from their vices. Similarly, you cannot go to Davos and advocate for an individualistic kind of American freedom based in natural law, natural rights, localism, and national sovereignty, because all those things are quite literally being undermined every day at Davos. All of them. Brian Kemp, according to reports, went to Davos to get deals for Georgia. To go talk to corporations, because there's a bunch of corporations. There's Cloudflare, Moderna, all kind of businesses go there to talk to them and get them to come to Georgia. Now, some people may say, well, he's bringing jobs to our state. No, what he is doing is he's acting against the will of the market to artificially put institutions in your state by giving them tax benefits and other forms of corporate welfare. He is actively violating the moral ethos of his office in the name of benevolence. And so often, violations of morality and law go on because they are presumed to be benevolent. What is there to conserve if you're not willing to stand on the solid rock foundation of individual liberty and Americanism and natural rights, natural law, objective reality, a sense of nationalism that establishes national sovereignty? What's left to conserve? If you're willing to sell your country, sell your people, sell your state, sell your constituents down the river for a few dollar bills, what's left to conserve? There is no compromise with the hideous monster called globalism, because the hideous monster called globalism actively attacks the root of everything that is American by its very existence. And in all honesty, it attacks the root of every single nation that exists that wants to be considered a nation, because as we defined it earlier, nations are inherently localized. They are not inherently globalized. A global nation is an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms, which does nothing more than confuse the necessary political dimensions needed for a nation to remain self-governing. There's nothing to conserve, nothing to gain from going to a bunch of technocrats who presume they know how to run your life better than you and are willing to do that by drafting up all these fancy plans. Nothing. So progressives who may advocate going to Davos, I have one question for you. In the progressive ethic, there's a sort of reliance on the working class and working people. How do you advocate for the working class while going to a group of people that are more than willing to ignore the working class and instead fight for the interests that they believe are best for society? How do you fix inequality by going to people who arguably in the progressive ethic contribute to quite a bit of inequality? How do you do this? These are two contradicting worldviews. The conservative nor the progressive can really, if they're being ideologically consistent, intellectually consistent, go to Davos, smile, and rub shoulders with people who go against every single thing they support. How can you fight for income equality or class unity when those concerns are no longer seen in their proper dimensions? Because as we mentioned, the concerns of certain nations, whether it be income inequality, whether it be class equality, whether it be welfare, whether it be taxation, all of these concerns presume that there is a localized nation or there is some kind of localized mechanism dealing with them. But if America were to become a global nation, again, a contradiction in terms, who would be dealing with those issues? Who would be accountable for those issues? The true danger of globalism is that it completely shifts the dimensions of political accountability and puts them in a faraway place. And as the American tradition has shown us, my friends, when governance is put in a faraway place, away from the accountability of the people, tyranny can more easily ensue. And not only that, but indifference, social indifference, political indifference also can easily ensue. And we understand that indifference can be a big cause of a lack of social cohesion. And if societal bonds are broken down and dissipated by that indifference, that can cause calamity. The preservation of society is the primary object of justice. It's the primary object of ethics. It's the primary object of morality. It's the primary object of everything that we have in this world to keep humans together and to keep our productive energies up. And that is threatened by globalism, by Davos, by central planners, by anyone who defies the human spirit. My friends, I'm not sure how else to say this. There is no compromise with globalism. There is no alliance with globalists. There are no friendly relationships with people who would see you subdued to the tyranny of experthood as opposed to the primacy of conscience. There is no compromise with people who reject subsidiarity, localization for globalism. All those people stand in the way of a freer, more prosperous society, and all those people and their visions should be rejected thoroughly by anyone who still wants to have any semblance of a good life left. Globalism threatens Americanism. It rejects the principles required for a functioning society, and it allows specific issues to be sacrificed for impersonal concerns. There is no compromise with globalism. Reject it. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, please be sure to comment on this video, like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this video. Please be sure to join my Discord, which is commented down below. Please be sure to donate to my Patreon or my PayPal or my locals. All of that's also down there below. Guys, I love you guys so much. And please stay enlightened, stay vigilant, and stay pensive. Bye, guys.